Hello everyone, this is Dark Journalist. Today a very special episode with Dr. Joseph Farrell regarding my research on Dr. Lloyd Berkner and JFK's undelivered speech on November 22nd, 1963 that was to have startling implications. We'll cover a recent discovery by Dr. Farrell on an advanced nuclear technology named Ripple and how all this relates to the UFO file and JFK's final speech. So we'll start here with a clip on Lloyd Berkner from my Apotheum UFO documentary series, and from there a full overview on the mysterious Ripple and its connection to the UFO file. This is the thing that I'm bringing forward, which has never been on the record, and this comes directly from the blue research that I've done. So Lloyd Berkner was the person that President Kennedy was going to meet at the Trade Mart.
Okay.
And the Trade Mart, on his way to the Trade Mart, he gets assassinated. So no one ever knew about what speech he was going to give. As a matter of fact, for 5 years, the speech was inaccessible, which is very odd. Eventually, the Johnson administration let it out and said, oh yeah, we think this was it. And it was some weird war speech about how we need more nuclear weapons or something. Kennedy would have never given a speech like that. So what speech was he actually going to give? Well, it's interesting, in Berkner's notes, there's a series of things, and I should explain that Berkner is an interesting guy. One, he's a major scientist for the government. Two, he had been in Antarctica with Admiral Byrd during the famous Byrd exploration to Antarctica. We have a number of secret projects involved in Antarctica. Deep Freeze is the one that's most well known. But whatever it is we're developing there, people can't really get a handle on it because how are you going to get any real intel out of Antarctica? What is interesting is that Berkner had been in Antarctica with Admiral Byrd. And so Lloyd Berkner shows up as an odd character. The next place he shows up on the map is he controls the Robertson panel, which is the first UFO examination by the government. They call in their top people. He's sitting right on the top of it. So Berkner, in 1963 at the Trade Mart in Dallas, he's the person President Kennedy is going to meet. And although Kennedy's records, and the speech were scrubbed, Berkner's notes have been unearthed. And what he said was the speech that they were going to give, one, was going to have international implications that were staggering. Now think about, Berkner and Kennedy going to meet him and all the things that Kennedy was doing with space. My suggestion is that it was going to be related either to a joint moon mission with the Russians or related to the UFO file. Because the kind of hubbub around the event, they were going to helicopter in a flag from the White House that had flown over the White House that Kennedy was going to present. This is from the White House notes. So there's only a couple of things on the record about it, but this you can take to the bank. He was going to hand the flag to Berkner before the announcement. And Berkner, his expertise was Antarctica and the UFO file. So that's pretty interesting when you get right down to it, when you're thinking about Kennedy himself. If you just boil it down to the day and what he was doing, he was going to the Trade Mart to meet Lloyd Berkner, Dr. Lloyd Berkner, and Berkner was major in the UFO file. So here's the strange thing about Berkner. Berkner, later on, will encounter this scientist researcher, James McDonald, and he'll meet with McDonald and one of LBJ's aides. They'll get together, and McDonald is obsessed with the UFO file. He wants to know where they've kept the secret records, and did they bring everything to Wright-Patterson, all this kind of talk. Berkner has that meeting, and then 3 weeks later, he goes to DC. He goes into a fast food place, has a hamburger, goes up to give his speech, and dies. So there's a lot of that type of activity around this subject. And, I think when we study Berkner's history, we're connected directly to Antarctica. So the thing that I found when looking for links with Antarctica and the Kennedy assassination is the weirdest one, which is that the person who owned the Texas School Book Depository, this is on the record, is named D.H. Byrd, and he's the cousin of Admiral Byrd, who discovered, did all the explorations to Antarctica. So D.H. Byrd, they called Dry Hole Byrd because of his oil explorations. He's the one who's funding all the Antarctica expeditions. So when you get into the assassination zone with President Kennedy, Lloyd Berkner has been to Antarctica and spent all this time with Byrd there. Kennedy's going to meet him. The person who owns the Texas School Book Depository, where they're going to sit this patsy in it, he's D.H. Byrd. He's Byrd's cousin. So there's an Antarctica stamp. Joseph, we got a glimpse there of Lloyd Berkner and his very unusual position in the story of Antarctica, in the story of the early UFO committee hearings, and then in the story of the Kennedy presidency. He's a very unusual and I think key figure when we're looking at all this. In your own research, you found something extraordinary in relation to this Operation Dominic. And it ties in directly with some of the things that I was trying to get at with Lloyd Berkner's meeting that JFK was headed to when he was assassinated at the Trade Mart.
At the Trade Mart.
And all the elaborate things they had ready there, including the placement of the flag from Kennedy into, from this flag that was helicoptered in, and Kennedy handing that flag to Berkner, and it is a flag that had flown over the White House.
Right.
The extraordinary kind of incidents of this, and then Berkner's letter after the fact saying we were going to have an international conversation of staggering implications, and it's, you know, recounting how it's a terrible shame this didn't happen, and the unusual things that happened with Berkner later. How did this conversation crisscross with work that you were doing about Operation Dominic, and what is this explosive piece of information in relation to the nuclear program?
Well, it's not actually my discovery. It was a discovery of a member on my website. We'll just use the initials KM.
Yes.
To thank the individual that put me onto this. But Operation Dominic was a series of atmospheric hydrogen bomb tests that President Kennedy authorized, personally himself, authorized to take place after the Soviet Tsar Bomba test. Do you remember the gigantic hydrogen bomb that the Soviet Union tested in October of 1960? I was a boy. I remember when that
they say it was the most dangerous thing done during the entire Cold War.
Oh, it was, well, yeah, 57 megatons.
Didn't you say that it blew out windows in Norway?
Yeah, it was about 900 miles from Norway. It was tested on the island of Novaya Zemlya up in the Arctic Circle, actually. Which, again, you know, you're playing around with Aurora Borealis and the solar wind from the sun and everything else. But yeah, it's 900 miles away from Norway, and it was rattling the windows in Norway. This was just an enormous. I remember Adlai Stevenson on the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite sitting in the Security Council of the UN talking about Mr. Khrushchev has exploded his gigantic bomb, you know.
Wow.
So yeah, this was a very tense time. Well, Kennedy authorized this series of atmospheric tests called Operation Dominic that which I had known about. I had just finished writing The Demon in the Acre and showing the actual fireball pictures of some of these tests. It was a very famous series of tests, but I did not look at the last test. And this is where it gets, folks, we're going to go around Harvey's barn here. We're going to get back to Kennedy at the Trade Mart with Berkner, because this is all prelude to it. When I heard Daniel's show, folks, and him talking about Trade Mart and Berkner, and you made a comment that there was a speech that Kennedy was going to give, and you pointed out that the speech was about tactical nukes and a bunch of stuff that really didn't amount to much of a big international event. And the
cover story, the cover story of that speech.
Yeah, the cover story. I thought, tactical nukes and all of this, and this immediately clicked that this may have been connected to what Kennedy and Berkner were going to do in Dallas at the Trade Mart. So anyway,
Yes.
so let's talk about Operation Dominic. Folks, you're going to have to bear with me here. In a hydrogen bomb, if you don't know how they're constructed at that time, then you need to know a bit. I talk about the construction of hydrogen bombs in my book, The Grid of the Gods. There's a chapter right at the beginning of that book about hydrogen bombs, okay? In a hydrogen bomb, in order to create the massive pressure on the atoms of fuel in a fusion reaction, you must have a radiation shock wave that is so enormous that it creates that pressure big enough to create the fusion. And the only way to get that pressure is by using an atom bomb to create it. So, in other words, the fuse, you have to understand this, the fuse on a hydrogen bomb is the atom bomb, because it's the atom bomb that releases the enormous amount of X-rays that you need to compress the fusion fuel to create a fusion reaction. That's the key. So in a hydrogen bomb, the fuse, the atom bomb, is called the primary. And in a hydrogen bomb, the fusion fuel that actually creates that enormous bang in a hydrogen bomb is called the secondary.
Uh-huh.
Now, the important thing to notice here, folks, is that in a hydrogen bomb, the radioactive fallout from the hydrogen bomb is all from the primary. It's from the fission, the atom bomb, splitting into all that particulate matter from uranium or plutonium. And it's that stuff that creates the radioactive fallout. So when you're looking at hydrogen bombs, you are dealing with yield to weight ratios.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, you're also dealing with a percentage of the actual yield that is the fissile reaction. In other words, the percentage of what is involved in a hydrogen bomb that creates the radiation fallout is a fraction of the actual yield of the bomb, but it's most of the fallout. So when the Tsar Bomba is blown by the Soviet Union, what the Soviets are demonstrating is they have detonated a relatively clean bomb with an enormous, and I mean gigantic, blast wave, a heat and pressure wave. And such a gigantic explosion that radiation from the atom bomb that sets us off is carried way, way up into the stratosphere to drift around the Earth. So in other words, the American response to this is going to have to be to demonstrate an even cleaner hydrogen bomb. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because when Kennedy authorizes the tests of Operation Dominic, at the last minute, he was approached by a scientist from Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. This is going to be a key part of the story here. And yes, we're going to go back to Ronald Richter and some Nazis. He's approached by a scientist from Lawrence Livermore by the name of John Nuckolls, Nuckolls, who had just joined Lawrence Livermore in the 1950s. And he has an entirely new idea for hydrogen bombs. So if you go online, I want everybody to do this, because from here on out, we're going to be dealing with a problem, a mystery. If you go online and look at Operation Dominic on Wikipedia, you'll see a list of all the shots in the test series. There's two to pay particular attention to, because these were added to the operation at the last minute on the personal authorization and direction of President Kennedy himself.
Interesting.
So
I'm going to put that. I'm going to put it up right now for everyone to look at
Right.
that. I'm going to put that chart up. So
Okay.
they're looking at it as we speak. Go
as
ahead.
we speak. Okay. So if you scroll down and look at Androscoggin and read across the list of columns in the Wikipedia article, you'll see that Androscoggin was the first test of a technology called Ripple, R-I-P-P-L-E. And the test, if you go all the way to the right-hand column on the Wikipedia article, the test results, it will show failure or something to the effect of failure, fizzle. So that was the first test of a new hydrogen bomb technology. We'll get back to what the technology is eventually. Now scroll all the way to the bottom. Because
so would you say Ripple 1 fizzle?
Ripple 1 fizzle. Androscoggin, the Androscoggin test. Scroll all the way to the bottom of the whole series of Dominic, and the very last test, when they called the whole series off, was a test called Housatonic, Housatonic.
Right.
The Housatonic test, if you scroll it was the second Ripple test, you'll learn as you read the columns, and then you scroll all the way to the right-hand side of the columns on the Wikipedia article, and what does it say? It says successful 99.9% clean.
Incredible.
Now, folks, that's the problem, because you've just blown off, and I think the yield was approximately 10 megatons. So you've blown off a sizable bomb.
Yeah.
With a 99.9% clean result in terms of radioactive fallout. Virtually
no fallout.
Radioactivity free.
Wow.
Now, what does that mean? Well, if you're thinking in normal terms of yield to weight ratios and the percentage of a yield that is dirty from the atomic bomb used to set off the hydrogen bomb, what you've just said, at the minimum, is that the atomic bomb that was used to initiate that gigantic explosion, the fission bomb, was very, very small. In other words, you have already made a revolutionary, not evolutionary, revolutionary leap forward in nuclear weapons design.
Incredible.
But that's not all. And this is where I think, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, one thing you pointed out about this test is it is, in fact, the last atmospheric test by the United States of this nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
Of any nuclear device.
And let's go further, Daniel. This is the last known test of that technology, period.
Unbelievable. It goes black. Right?
It goes so deeply and completely black that it is classified to this day.
Unbelievable.
Believe me, I was originally going to do a webinar on this whole, and even a book, and I finally got a hold of a book that talked about some aspects of this technology, and I even wrote a letter to the scientist asking for his permission to cite his book, and I was denied.
Wow. On what grounds?
Who knows? Probably because he went online and saw that I wrote crazy books, and I'm not a scientist, and I wouldn't understand his brilliance, whatever.
Right. That is interesting, though. To me, that's unusual, because these guys love to be cited.
Totally. I know what the book is. I have a copy. I was going to refer to it because it's the only book that I found that corroborated the details of what I was thinking in my mind when I read the only other public source, which we're going to get to in a minute, about this technology.
You want to mention what the name of the book is or not?
I can't mention it. I don't want to throw any business this guy's way. He was a bit of a jerk, to be quite frank.
That's fine. In any case, you are talking about the ripple technology.
I'm talking about the ripple technology.
Okay.
It goes completely black after this last atmospheric test. And incidentally, whatever happened in this test, I suspect strongly that the results were communicated to the Soviet Union.
Oh.
And what happens? Well, the Soviet Union, and probably communicated to Great Britain too, they immediately signed the test ban treaty preventing any further atmospheric tests.
Which is let's talk about revolution. This is a gigantic thing.
Gigantic revolution.
Yeah. It's one of Kennedy's strongest accomplishments, period.
It is a huge accomplishment, especially in the atmosphere at that time, in the wake of the Tsar bomb test and some of the British tests. So I think that last test in Operation Dominic, it not only proved the technology, it proved the technology beyond their wildest expectations.
Oh, wow.
So what does that 99.9% clean statement mean? That's the real question.
What are the ramifications of
what
a
are the
geopolitical
the geopolitical ramifications of a bomb that clean means that all that nasty radioactive fallout that you've been worrying about from a nuclear war evaporate.
Wow.
And nuclear wars, all of a sudden, if you know how this technology works, if you can produce this technology and make it operational, that means nuclear wars just became fightable.
Wow.
Now,
you could have a nuclear exchange without that level of devastation.
Without the level of radioactive after effect. Yes.
That is so chilling. And also, I mean, it's good, I guess you could say on one hand, but it's also chilling.
But it all depends on the interpretation of that 99.9% clean.
Right.
How does this technology work? Well, as my friend that initially made me aware of this, as I'm reading the Wikipedia article, there's a little footnote at the end of that last column on the Housatonic test that you can click on, and it takes you to the only publicly available paper on this technology. The one. Not several textbooks. I found the textbook I found because I had an idea in my head of what the technology was, which is why we're doing this behind a paywall. I don't want people to go out in their garage and put together a hydrogen bomb. Okay. I'm not in that business. But anyway.
It is in fact available at MIT as part of their Deep Wire. It's called Ripple, an investigation of the world's most advanced high-yield thermonuclear weapon design.
Yes.
This is it.
And it was published in 2021, a mere 3 years ago, in the Journal of Cold War Studies in volume 23, number 2, pages 133 to 161. Okay.
Incredible. Do you want to read?
I'm going to be reading from this paper. I'm getting right there. Okay.
Got it.
So let me begin with something truly astonishing that this paper says. I've got all my tabs numbered here.
Take your time.
So here we go. And I want you to listen very, very carefully. And I've got to read these in the order that I marked them. This is from the paper. Quote, "The ripple concept story begins in 1955 when 24-year-old John H. Knuckles joined Livermore as a thermonuclear explosives designer." Now, stop right there. Because when I read that, I thought, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is 1 year, folks. 1 year after the United States Air Force secretly sent a team of people to Buenos Aires, Argentina, to interview one Nazi scientist by the name of Dr. Ronald Richter,
Right.
whom I talk about in my book, The Nazi International, at copious length.
There's no question. He's been in the center of your Nazi international research.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And what was Dr. Richter doing in Argentina? Well, if you recall the story, in 1953, shortly after our first hydrogen bomb test, Juan Perón gave a press conference to the Argentinian press and Latin American press, Americans not included. And Juan Perón made the announced to the world that Argentina had solved the mystery of the hydrogen bomb, and he proceeds to introduce Dr. Richter to the world press, who proceeds to inform the world that he's figured out how you can achieve fission. And in the process, he makes a claim that is so contrary to the nuclear physics of the day. Remember, you have to have an atom bomb to set these dang things off. That's the way they work. But Richter claimed to be doing it without that ingredient.
Whoa.
So immediately, of course, he's roundly denounced in the world press for being a fraud. And the storm of controversy even includes people like Werner Heisenberg and so on and so forth. So Juan Perón contacts his good friend, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, to see if he can send him a physicist to examine the claims of Dr. Richter. Well, I got just the guy. He's from your own country, Dr. Jose Balcero. So Perón puts this Argentinian physicist in command of reviewing all of Richter's research. And eventually he's denounced for being a mountebank, because Richter is claiming, please follow me here, this is all going to tie back to Kennedy. Richter is claiming to achieve fusion energies and actual fusion at temperatures far below those produced by an atom bomb. And he's also producing the fusion basically from electrical arcs from high voltage. In other words, Richter's making a cold fusion claim here, folks. Yeah.
This is incredible.
It gets better.
All the way back into the 50s. He's
into the 50s. And then on top of this, as this controversy is going, the United States Air Force sends down a team of people to interview Dr. Richter secretly. And this is included in my book, The Nazi International. The Air Force team, when they interview him, can't figure out this guy. They're about half divided. The guy's a complete fraud and a mountebank, or he's some sort of mad genius. And this is exactly the way the Air Force report reads. It sums him up quite literally in the same paragraph by denouncing him as a fraud, a mountebank, a swindler, and as some sort of mad genius working in the 1970s.
Oh, wow.
In other words, we don't know what to make of this guy.
They're saying he's 20 years ahead.
He's 20 years ahead of where they're at. So Richter makes this claim, and in addition to this, folks, he says, "Well, I'm rotating my plasma, and I'm using radio Lamore precession frequencies, and I'm pulsing it with a lot of electricity, and I'm getting fusion out of this." And this report, incidentally, is written in 1954. In other words, a year before all of this has had time to percolate through the American secret projects defense industry. And I think, therefore, it's got some direct tie-in to this Ripple technology. And you'll see more of the connections in just a minute. So what is this Ripple technology? Well, if you go back to Richter, what Richter is telling you, I can even point you in the Nazi International to the quotation where he says, "I'm using plasmas and arc welder shock waves and Lamore precession frequency to access the 0 point energy, and that's where I'm getting all this energy from."
Right.
Okay. Fusion at temperatures way below atom bombs, Lamore precession frequency, rotating plasma, shock waves from arc welders, and voila, we get fusion.
Wow.
And that in turn is accessing 0-point energy. Yeah, this guy is a little ahead of the crowd.
Wow. Amazing.
So what about ripple? So what's going on with these ripple tests and this 99.9% clean, as if the atom bomb component in the 10 megaton explosion doesn't even exist?
Wow.
Please note what I just said. The atom bomb component doesn't even exist. Folks, this is the holy grail of thermonuclear weapons, to be able to create a hydrogen bomb explosion without the need for the atom bomb to set it off.
That's unbelievable.
Because if you can achieve such a thing, you basically are radiation free. Yeah, you've got a lot of gamma rays and free neutrons flowing around because of the initial explosion. But after that, that's it. Okay? So listen to this from that document, the MIT document. This is Knuckles himself talking about basically, and the technical jargon here is going to be a little difficult, but please remember what he's talking about here are all the components that make up the primary, the atom bomb that sets off the H bomb.
Yes.
This is Knuckles. Quote, I developed an ablatively driven spherical rocket implosion to compress deuterium tritium. Notice the fuel there.
Mm-hmm.
It's not lithium deuteride. It's a mixture of deuterium and tritium. Tritium is the rarest hydrogen isotope. It has two neutrons and one proton in the nucleus. Okay,
it's tritium.
Tritium, tritium. It's the
Right.
exact opposite of helium-3 in a certain sense, okay? To compress deuterium tritium to high densities without the use of a pusher. A sustained ablatively driven implosion is made possible by use of a sustained driver input and a suitable ablator. Optimum pulse shapes, in other words, this is a guy thinking if we can just shape the shock wave driving the fusion properly, we can create a much cleaner bomb. That's what he's telling you right there.
Yeah.
Optimum pulse shapes make possible a very high isentropic compression of most of the deuterium tritium while igniting a central hotspot. The temperature of the hotspot is amplified by adjusting the pulse shape, there you are again, so that a strong shock is generated near zero radius, and by using a hollow target design containing of low-density deuterium tritium gas. In other words, a plasma.
Wow. Whoa.
Whoa. Gets better. The author of the article says, well, what does this optimized pulse shape look like? A description can be found in the physics of inertial fusion. In other words, this is also related to your ability to create a fusion reactor. So in other words, the same thinking, the same concepts, I want people to lash their mind around this. The same concepts that are building the clean bomb can also build a clean reactor.
Oh, yes.
Oh, now it's getting interesting.
No required nuclear meltdown possibility, nothing.
Nothing. Quote, fast and nearly isentropic compression, however, can be achieved by superimposing a sequence of shocks. That's key. In principle, going to the limit of an infinite number of shocks of infinitesimal strength. Let me repeat that one, folks. Because if you're following the logic here, what he just told you was take your A-bomb and throw it out completely.
Oh, wow.
An infinite number of shocks of infinitesimal strength each. Rapid isentropic compression to arbitrary density is possible. However, each shock in the sequence has speed larger than its predecessor, and therefore will catch up with it after a certain time. Therefore, the temporal increase of the pressure creating the shock sequence has, in other words, you're time engineering here, folks.
Wow.
Has to be shaped carefully such that shocks coalesce at, please note what he's telling you here. If you were able to make a really dinky A-bomb, you could set off all of this stuff and have such a tiny amount of radioactive fallout as a result as to be virtually clean.
Wow.
So one more time. Therefore, the temporal increase of the pressure creating the shock sequence has to be shaped carefully such that shocks coalesce at the same time. All right. So we've got that in hand. So how do you do that?
And this is Knuckles. That whole statement.
This is Knuckles. Yeah, this is Knuckles.
Okay.
Nuckolls. Okay. So what does all this mean? Now we're going back to John Graham's, the author of this paper. And again, I'm reading all this and I'm thinking Ronald Richter. Ronald Richter. This whole thing, and I'm also thinking cold fusion. Because if you are able to coalesce all those shock waves on a point to create the criticality needed to initiate the fusion chain reaction, if you're able to do that, if you're able to engineer those shocks, then the amount of the fission component needed to set it off with the proper engineering reduces and reduces and reduces. So in other words, listen to what the author of the article says, quote, "Here we pass into the realm of educated guesses and probability as classification comes into play. Based on the available evidence, we can reasonably conclude that the ripple concept is nothing less than the direct application of nascent inertial confinement fusion technology to the full-scale thermonuclear explosive design." In other words, reverse what he just said. You can take the same technology and create a fusion reactor.
Fascinating.
And who's doing that in Argentina and claiming to be doing that? This is why I think whatever Kennedy was doing with these tests, when this test was successful, they had the technology.
Wow.
Now, folks, stop and let that sink in. They've had the technology since 1963, if not before. But by this series of tests, we know it works.
Incredible. This is
so why aren't they using it? Yeah.
Why aren't they using it? Well, why aren't they using it publicly?
Yeah, well, we're back to Berkner and Kennedy in just a minute. The key features being a high-gain pressureless spherical secondary of thin hollow shell design imploded by a temporally shaped, highly optimized X-ray pulse from a compact, highly efficient fission primary. Now, the key to making the ripple concept work is the highly secret and extremely complex pulse shaping mechanism that transforms the single strong X-ray burst from the primary into a series of precisely timed shocks. In other words, the technology here, I hope people really latched on to what he just said, because the technology here has nothing really to do with the A-bomb. It has nothing to do with the H-bomb component. It has to deal with the technology of how to shape those X-ray shock waves. It has to deal with entirely non-nuclear elements.
Wow.
Now, if you're starting to hear maybe little resonances of Pons and Fleischmann here, and cold fusion, and the idea that cold fusion takes place as a low energy nuclear reaction, or as its other model suggests, a lattice assisted nuclear reaction. In other words, the energy of the reaction is coming out of the shape and composition of the elements within which the reaction takes place. In this case, in Pons and Fleischmann's case, palladium rods that have been literally saturated with deuterium, with heavy water.
Oh, wow.
That's it. Yeah, that's a wow.
Incredible.
You just got it. That's a wow. And we're not yet back to Kennedy. Trust me, folks, we're getting there. Okay,
What I find extraordinary is the 60 years in
yes,
between
yes,
keeping up this entire facade around
yes,
the nuclear weapons, where they're at, and how supposedly there's been no real advances.
right. Ding, ding, ding. This, folks, this technology is still classified.
Mm.
So how are we getting this primary, this non-nuclear element of what is involved here? And again, the article gives you a clue. It requires, first of all, the ignition of a small deuterium-tritium mass, quote, confined by a pusher, parenthesis, a dense metal shell. Pons and Fleischmann. What's palladium? It's a dense metal.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Yes.
And then beginning in, this is Knuckles again, I used with the weapons program's latest radiation implosion and burn codes to explore the feasibility of igniting a deuterium-tritium fusion microexplosion with a tiny radiation implosion. I postulated that a non-nuclear primary, listen to what he now says, a non-nuclear primary could be invented to energize a tiny radiation implosion.
They don't even need.
You don't need the atom bomb.
Incredible. And he's there on the record, having been in the research, saying, you don't even need it.
This is his invention.
Wow.
The Housatonic test was his invention. Now, I have a feeling I know what the non-nuclear element and this business about pulse shaping is. Because in the literature, they discovered, as a component of the early Star Wars research. Remember, Reagan wanted to put X-ray lasers up in space.
Yes.
Well, first of all, you got to create an X-ray laser, which ain't easy. Or even worse, a grazer, a gamma ray laser. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, at the time, the way they were talking in the public literature was they'd have to explode a nuclear weapon on material that would create a coherent burst of gamma rays or X-rays. So you destroy the weapon when you set it off. However, a fellow by the name of Mossbauer discovered that you could create a gamma ray burst repeatedly from certain materials under the proper acoustic conditions. Shock waves again.
Interesting.
Shock waves. So in other words, the concept has been there, and this guy creates an actual functioning technology to create a hydrogen bomb with at least a very minimal primary.
Wow.
99.9% clean.
It's fascinating to me also because we hear about these unusual tests of them setting off a nuke in space.
Right.
And how this was one of the weird, things that wasn't repeated. And I think it's called Operation Starfish.
Yes.
But, now these things are starting to open up as to why they even happened in the first place.
Right. Now, all of this technology, this successful Housatonic test, was talked about and reviewed by President Kennedy himself, chairing a meeting of the National Security Council after the tests were concluded. And most of the discussion is about these successful ripple tests. And if you go to the article itself is full of quotations from this meeting. So let me read a bit of that.
Yes.
This is McGeorge Bundy talking to Kennedy during this meeting. Mr. President, you asked the question. National Security Advisor. Mr. President, you asked the question, what test do we take now? I do not find that it's an unacceptably long list in the context of various ideas and possibilities and knowledge that we probably have. I agree with the Secretary of State that that's the Ripple 2 test is the proper test.
Oh.
I think this may be our last clear chance to do this. This is before the actual test. And I think there's a great deal to be said for getting in a posture in which we have clearly found out the things we need to find out, because we may have a year or a year and a half when it's not easy to find out. President Kennedy, you think. Dean Rusk. In fact, a major change in the weight to yield ratio, for example, is very important from a security point of view, and then it trails off into more unclarity. So in other words, the focus of these tests at these meetings is the Ripple device.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's successful, here's my supposition. When it's successful, there is one final key crucial thing in these meetings that they talk about, and this is going to flip you out. I've got to find the right number.
I love how the way that they're talking is about discovering also, which is if we do it, we can discover what we need to know and move on. Now, you sitting down? Take a big pull of your adult beverage, because you suggested in your talk that whatever Berkner and Kennedy are going to release at Dallas, and in the context here, with all their discussion in that speech about nuclear weapons and tactical nuclear weapons, and this was going to have major international significance. I think I think the speech as we have it is part of the speech that he was originally going to give. Now that's interesting already.
With the crucial parts cut out. Those parts relating to Ripple, its successful test, and its implications for fusion energy, and one more thing. You ready?
Yes.
This is the author of that paper, and he's talking about a conversation he had with a scientist named Foster. Quote, in our conversation about where the Ripple concept stands today, Foster asked me to consider one use to which it could be ideally suited. Near-Earth object deflection.
Oh.
The success of nuclear near-Earth object deflection, asteroids, folks.
Wow.
But why not UFOs? Or both?
It's a defense mechanism for near-Earth objects coming in from space.
Uh-huh.
Incredible.
The success of nuclear near-Earth orbit deflection is directly proportional to the device yield and weight.
Oh.
The higher the yield, the shorter lead time required for interception.
Oh.
You've just solved a lot of UFO problem right there.
Incredible.
The tremendous yield to weight advantages of the Ripple concept over anything available is unquestionable. Unquote.
Wow.
So I think your instincts, based on all of this stuff about Ripple, that whatever they were going to reveal there, it wasn't about tactical nukes, but I do think it had something to do with this series and with this specific Housatonic test.
Wow.
And having made the proof of shot test, Kennedy, in my thinking, probably immediately shared the information with the British and shared the information with the Soviets. We just took your nuclear weapons to the final generation.
Wow.
So we can all put this in the bottle now and use this stuff for something else. And we got a little problem flying around our skies.
Hey, right, exactly. This is incredible, though.
And would Berkner buy that? In a heartbeat.
He was the head of the Robertson panel.
He was the head of the Robertson panel. Yeah, you betcha.
It's fascinating. This has all kinds of implications, and the way that they're talking about it at that point. Here's the interesting thing. If they go into that meeting, Berkner and Kennedy at the Trade Mart, first of all, why is Kennedy selecting to meet with Berkner, on this trip? And why is it the focus of so much of the trip at this point that they're going to have this incredible ceremony and all the rest. And then we know Berkner moving his way through these various positions, including as a 24-year-old going to Antarctica with Admiral Byrd. And then creating in 1952 the International Geophysical Year for 1957-58 to study the ionosphere. His background, and again, he doesn't have scientific degrees. This is also what's interesting about him. Everything with him is kind of an honorary title. But he has this great inside knowledge, and so he becomes this figure as he moves through Antarctica. He moves through the UFO file with the Robertson panel, and finally IGY, which is studying the ionosphere with Soviet scientists. So here you're bringing in that aspect that you're talking about. He's also the figure who announces Sputnik to the world when it happens, because he's at a meeting and supposedly a New York Times reporter whispers in his ear, and he becomes the one who announces it. So he's there. He's like a very interesting character, almost Zelig style character, moving through these different incidents. And then finally, he is the person that Kennedy is going to meet at the Trade Mart. And the speech, it's interesting. If we take it from your discovery here of what we might be looking at for what they had with Ripple. Now, because of Berkner's background in space and his further activities, James McDonald comes into the picture and after the assassination and meets with him. And they have this whole 3-hour meeting between James McDonald, the UFO researcher, an LBJ aide, and Berkner in a house for 4 hours. And all the notes are taken, and the whole thing is recorded by McDonald. Well, both Berkner and McDonald meet very unusual ends. Berkner dies very shortly after that. He leaves the meeting with McDonald. A few weeks later, he goes back to Washington, D.C. He goes into his think tank. He's about to give this speech there. He stops off at a fast food place. He gets up to give his speech at the think tank. He dies on the spot. And we know McDonald had a very mysterious end as well. What's interesting to me is that somehow in the Ripple discovery of all this, the people involved that we're talking about, and I would be fascinated to know if this Knuckles person had any kind of connection to exotic technology along the UFO side. It's interesting to me that all the people involved around this have that UFO file connection, including Kennedy.
Okay. At this point, I don't think that you start designing these types of weapons with anything else in mind other than a space usage, because that last quotation gave the game away. So, in other words, I think Knuckles right out the window. Is connected with this. I now think Richter is, because remember what Richter was working on inside of Nazi Germany. All of this comes out of his work on the Bell.
Right.
Exactly. We're back to that again.
You're right in the heart of the Bell Project.
But the problem with Kennedy and Berkner, I think there's another aspect, a possible aspect of why all of this may have played into the speech that he was planning to give, and all of a sudden they're removing it from the speech because, number one, it's still classified.
Right.
And he was planning, to use that presidential power and just announce it to the world. Hey, guys, this is what we've done. Doing so with Berkner to make an announcement of that kind of technology, and Kennedy, if he has his hands on a technology like that, he's going to include all of its potential uses in his speech. We can use it to blow away asteroids and UFOs, and have free energy, all of this stuff. Exactly. It's going to be right in the Kennedy playbook.
This is the new frontier.
Okay, so anyway, why would he plan to make an announcement like that at the Trade Mart in Dallas with Lloyd Berkner?
Right.
And I have one answer for you, and I know you're going to get it. Lyndon Baines Johnson. This is, I think,
Senator NASA himself.
Senator NASA. This is Kennedy's way of playing a trump that LBJ doesn't even know exists.
Right.
Because
Right.
interestingly enough, LBJ is not present at any of those meetings or briefings about the Ripple test.
Oh, that's interesting. That's conspicuous.
That's conspicuous by its absence.
Wow. Oh, that is very interesting.
That's huge. And here, I'll go you one step further, Daniel. I suspect that by the time that Kennedy is assassinated and this technology goes completely black again, I bet you they didn't even tell LBJ after he took office.
Wow. Right. They only needed him as a puppet.
They only needed him as a puppet.
And
so we've got to get our hands on that whole dang UFO file, and this Ripple stuff is now a huge part of it. Because with the kind of technology it enables, it's not only big clean hydrogen bombs. You've got a propulsion system.
Wow. Yeah, and you have
ding ding ding
UFO defense system.
Yeah, all at once.
It is incredible. You know what's amazing about this? Well, let's go into, just for a moment, JFK and Berkner, and we'll leave it pre-Ripple and post-Ripple in terms of the equation. Okay. Pre-Ripple, I brought into this, discovery about Berkner and Kennedy that it's interesting that Kennedy was going there to meet him. First of all, his own security forces had told him there's too many exits and entrances to the Trade Mart. You can't do a speech there. Forget it. That's one. He defies them. He has them set up security people to go there in advance and check it out and make sure that it's viable. So he wants the Trade Mart for this. And he selects the people that he's going to meet on the Trade Mart speech. So he gets, after all these visits that he does in Texas, Fort Worth and all the rest of it, he makes this one the real focus of the whole thing. And this is where he's heading when he is assassinated. And it's fascinating to me because a lot of the people who get to the Trade Mart who are in the motorcade don't even realize that he's been assassinated.
Right.
And they're going there and making their meetings and greetings and all the rest of it. Berkner's there. He's ready to do the whole meeting. When Kennedy is assassinated, Berkner writes this letter and he says, this was going to be a staggering meeting and it was going to have international implications. And, Kennedy was a great man. And I would like to impart the weight of the speech that he was going to give here to all of you. That's what he says in the letter. It's documented. The speech has a mysterious path as well, because at first, nobody is able to get their hands on the speech. And the LBJ administration says, we don't know where it is, or, we have different copies of it, and it finally shows up in some version late in the 60s. And then they come out with this version, and it's the unspoken speech. And AP says, yep, that's the one that we were given in 1963. It's got him talking about charging up our nuclear facilities and all the rest. But when we look at Berkner and we think, what on earth would Kennedy be giving a speech at the Trade Mart with Berkner, with the elaborate ceremony of the helicopter, the White House flag, this whole thing that he designs, not with a bunch of people, but with Berkner. And so when we're looking at that, and then we know Lloyd Berkner's history through those various things that we've already described, the pre-Ripple discovery setup of this is, obviously, he was going to talk about something incredibly important, and the speculation from my side is it was related to space. It was related to a joint moon mission with the Soviets, or it was related to the UFO file. Somehow, it was going to have that type, because I don't think Berkner would say it would have international implications otherwise.
Right.
Then let's now add in the fact of everything that's been discovered here that you've put forward about Ripple and the statements of Knuckles. Now let's talk about it post-Ripple, and then you encapsulate it now, take it away post-Ripple.
All right. Here's what I think is happening, if that's what you're asking me for.
Yeah.
Number one, I think that the speech that we have that they say that Kennedy was going to give is exactly the speech he gave to them.
Aha.
Maybe some changes here and there, but nothing more than cosmetic.
Mm-hmm.
However, you can see what I do when I make my outlines. I'm constantly adding little marginal notes.
Yes.
And Kennedy, I strongly suspect, probably had a little piece of paper in his suit pocket. Add this here.
Mm.
And it's that little addendum where he might have gone into the revelation of this technology, its potentials for space, for energy, for remaking the international order. This is at the time he's been secretly talking with Nikita Khrushchev about going to the moon. Well, if you've got something like this, you can get there fairly easy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think that's number one in regarding the speech. Berkner, I think, would have been there because he's the one that you can use to give a stamp of approval and for all of this. He's the one that could, in Kennedy's thinking, gather together all these disparate elements of the space enterprise that Johnson has more or less direct control of inside of Texas, if you make the announcement.
Oh, yes.
Berkner is the perfect man. And how do you symbolize his anointing? Give him a White House flag.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
the message to someone like Lyndon Johnson of that kind of act is going to be crystal clear, especially if you're like the Kennedys and you're planning to get Lyndon off the ticket.
Right. Exactly. You're saying to that Texas power structure, we've got you beat.
We've got you beat, and your guy ain't the anointed one. And that the symbolism of the flag there, Kennedy may have been thinking, maybe I'll pick Lloyd Berkner as my running mate. He's got all the scientific credentials to replace Lyndon. Lyndon's done his job in Congress for us and getting NASA up and all of this.
Right.
Don't need him anymore.
Yes.
And Lyndon's up to his earballs, or
he's going to be put in prison.
He's going to be put in prison. Bobby Baker and all of that.
Right. All the scandals that are dragging around with him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, it's common knowledge. It's being whispered around Washington at the time the Kennedys are going to drop Lyndon.
Nixon, in fact, mentions it the morning of the assassination in a press conference.
Yeah.
Because he happens to be in Dallas, as we know.
Yeah. So on top of all of that, I think that little the flag ceremony, the way I'm looking at it, is that this is Kennedy's way of showing the anointment of ditching Lyndon and signaling that there's going to be a transition now, a new kind of presidency where someone that is familiar with all of this scientific technocracy is part of the government. At a high level. This is, I think, what's going on with that meeting. So, there's why. So we go back to why was he assassinated? Well, if you add up everything that's been said about the assassination, in my opinion, there is a heavy Nazi component at a very deep level. At a very deep level.
Yes.
And the reason why they want him out, in addition to the mob and the CIA and the Dulles brothers and the bankers, they've all got their reasons to get rid of the guy. But the reason the Nazis want him out is, number one, he's threatened to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces, and that's their cover in this country. Oh, let's not forget that on the ground inside the Eastern Bloc, human intelligence for the CIA is a bunch of Nazis.
Right.
That's the truth of the matter.
Yeah.
The other problem is that he wants to share all of this stuff with the Soviet Union. And those people, if you've read what I think is going on in the Apollo program, you'll know that, number one, I don't think that the moon landings were a hoax, but two, I do think that there is an exotic technology involved in getting us there and getting us off the moon, and that it's coming from deals struck with those post-war Nazis inside of NASA.
Absolutely. Look,
And and
nobody else has even gone to the moon.
right,
Right. I mean,
and with the Ripple technology, you've got something that if you're paying attention or doing, the dot connecting like I was trying to do earlier in our talk, goes directly back to some of the statements of Richter, and he in turn goes back to the bell. So yeah, there's all these things you don't want anybody looking at if President Kennedy gets to the trademark and makes that damn speech.
Oh, wow. So yeah, wow, that's really incredible. All the things that are hanging out in the background on the exotic technology front are connected in, if he
In that,
reveals that at the speech.
yeah,
Now,
that's what I think is going on.
yeah. And it's interesting to me because it's a lot more practical to announce that than the UFO file, for example.
Well, let's put the cherry on the sundae. The reason I think the speech that we have is the speech that Kennedy handed to him, and that he had a little, probably, typewritten or handwritten addendum tucked in his coat pocket with a little marked point in his speech. Add this part here.
Right. Yes.
Given everything I've said, what's the one last thing you need to do? Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to announce that Premier Khrushchev and I have been in private negotiations to have both countries go to the moon in a joint mission.
Right.
That's when you do it.
Wow. And that would have blown away the whole
Talk about
space race.
international event.
That's the reason you'd have the flag flown in, delivered via helicopter by the National Guard guys coming up and handing him the flag that he hands to Berkner. I wanted to mention this to you about Berkner because
Was there a Soviet flag that maybe was flown into Dallas that might have been exchanged with that one to symbolize the joint moon mission, in addition to all this technology that's been announced?
wow. Yes.
So yeah, Kennedy has, with Lyndon Johnson, the anointing aspect of the flag and all of this stuff. If you add all of this speculation together, you've got a major event, and the deep state people are just going to have to take him out.
Wow. It's incredible. I want to mention this about Berkner because I think this ties Berkner into your Ripple piece.
Mm-hmm.
Berkner ran afoul of SAC.
Yeah.
Strategic Air Command, and they regularly requested communist checks on him. They did everything to make his life miserable. None of it, of course, panned out in any direction because he wasn't even like an Oppenheimer. But he, Oppenheimer, and others like Vannevar Bush were convinced that you didn't need ICBMs and that whole thing about MAD, etc., was completely not required.
Right.
So the mutual assured destruction, this whole piece. This is what's interesting to me is that Berkner said you could have civil defense that would create this whole scenario. The fact that he was part of this group that eventually would be called Zork, and that this whole Zork thing came up in the mid-50s, and it was a number of scientists who said, you don't need this. And then the Zork thing became part of the, this is the anti-American thing. We're going to take these scientists through committee. And it was used as an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
And I said Zork is also a weird name because Zork was supposedly the names of these scientists, including Oppenheimer, except that the other scientists they were talking about, his initial didn't match. So that was just like, well, where'd you get that name from? But this thing about, and it could have been an inside creation, looking at an actual group that was getting together and saying, we have a different type of nuclear material available. And you don't need to build all these ICBMs, and that, the realization of this incredible machine of deep state military spending and control and both sides and all the rest of it. You don't need it because we have this. So with Zork, they created this, these scientists are trying to keep us behind the Soviets. They're communists. Let's expose them. And it kept people like Oppenheimer and Berkner on the ropes.
Let's look at it. Let's extend that.
Yes.
If you've got a technology which you've just done the proof of concept experiment, and you have fired off a 10 megaton hydrogen bomb with a minimal and possibly no nuclear primary. Okay, in 1963.
Wow.
If you've done that, what happens to the enormous defense infrastructure that you've had to put in place and you are spending and sustaining with billions of dollars to produce A bombs to fire off your H bombs?
Wow.
You've just made the whole thing
irrelevant.
Wow. Totally.
Joseph, it's remarkable. It is absolutely remarkable.
Yeah, it's just, you don't need those gigantic uranium separation plants and breeder reactors for plutonium. You may, if it's a small primary that's involved, then you need a little bit of that kind of industry, but not this massive thing that we built in the post-war period.
Incredible.
And the same for the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
So, if Kennedy's planning to make announcements and give all this away and go to the moon with the Soviet Union, and here, Lloyd, have a flag and take it to the Kremlin and bring back theirs.
Yeah, right.
And Lyndon, I hope you're paying attention.
They can't let him get to the Trade Mart.
They can't let him get to the Trade Mart. No way.
Wow.
This is the last thing they want to happen. So, they've got to get rid of the man. And then, having done that, they finally figure out, well, we better take care of Bobby too, and make sure that Teddy has a plane crash or two and messes up his back. And,
Right. And deal with him in Chappaquiddick. Yeah.
And deal with him in Chappaquiddick.
On the night of the moon landing, right?
Yeah. And to make sure Khrushchev keeps his damn mouth shut, we'll just place him under house arrest. Tell the commies, keep that man in his dacha in the Crimea and tell him to shut up.
they throw him out. Less than a year later.
They throw him out less than a year later. Brezhnev, of all people, caterpillar eyes. Unreal.
Kennedy had this interesting habit of getting around the State Department with his speeches.
Mm-hmm.
And he did exactly what you said, which is that he would give them one speech and then change the speech. Mm-hmm. I remember Colin Powell discussing how he was always taking this UFO piece out of Reagan's speeches when Reagan liked to talk about what if we had an alien threat, and that he, in his own biography now, his autobiography, Colin Powell writes that he missed the one that Reagan said at the UN. So, they wanted to keep Reagan to stop saying this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so Kennedy, when he does the American University speech, which is a remarkable speech in June of 63, he says, we need to look at the Soviet Union and ourselves. We're all mortal, and it's not a Pax Americana. Let's do this. And it's basically the ultimate peace speech. There's no question. Right. But that speech, just like Eisenhower's military industrial complex speech, was intentionally designed to get around the CIA, the State Department, and all the rest. So this speech, the Berkner speech, the final speech he was going to give, the strange one, the first thing that I thought when I read the version that they have out there, and then I also read about the incredible rabbit trail of how it was kept away from anyone who wanted to research it. And then this cover story that this was the speech, and I was reading it and thinking, Kennedy, we know, wants all these reductions in nuclear arms and all the rest. So why is this thing talking about having the most robust nuclear force and all the rest? To me, my first reaction was, this speech is a fraud. Now, I've come more into, after this discussion, come more into the idea that the speech is the intact speech without Kennedy embellishing it. This is the one he gave to them to get them off his back so he could do this with Berkner.
Now,
so the announcement could have been right there, we're going into space with the Russians. And by the way, the nuclear technology, the gains that we've made, we have proof of concept that we're going to be able to reshape the world in terms of that threat.
right.
That to me is the kind of reason to keep that speech so under wraps as well.
Oh, there's many reasons to keep the speech as we have it now, the extant speech. I was puzzled by the constant references. Well, we've got so many strategic warheads and tactical warheads, and we're expanding this and we're expanding that. And I'm thinking, okay, why is he emphasizing this in the context of what I'm thinking may have been the missing component? Well, it's rather easy once you get your mind around the implications of this ripple technology. And please understand, folks, we were talking about a smattering of that paper. That paper is actually about 40 pages long.
Extraordinary. It's an extraordinary,
yeah, it is. And you really have to sit down and read the whole thing to understand how truly revolutionary this technology was.
And how
otherwise
ignored,
they wouldn't have it. Well, how ignored, and why is it still classified, and why does no one understand how it works? Well, I was going to say, if you're dealing with that kind of spherical secondary where the pushers are designed, the things that compress the fusion fuel, where the pushers are designed to create a shock wave or series of shock waves that moves through that sphere and reaches the core at the same exact instant. And these are all small shock waves. That sphere has to be composed of different material. It's that simple. Things like things with that you can guess the speed of an X-ray pulse through, that the refraction into, simple things like plastic, stuff, just layers of different stuff that you've precisely calculated if you have a small primary to set off that X-ray compression. And as Knuckles was pointing out, all you need is the shock wave. You don't need the atom bomb. The important point is the shock wave. So you can do that through acoustics. You can do that through electrical arcing. Think Ronald Richter. If you can get it to enough precision to do this. So what that also means is that the way you shape the shockwave pulse will also affect your yield.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, this is a basic technological step to what some people have been alleging are the latest generation of nuclear weapons that we have now, that you can actually dial the yield that you want to result from the explosion. Yeah, it's dial a yield, 0.5 kilotons or 200,
right.
It's up to you how big a bang you want. Suitcase nukes, all of this stuff. And, imagine now, we're talking about suitcase nukes. The core, the plutonium core of the Fat Man bomb at Nagasaki was about yay big. The explosives around it for the implosion device were about 6 feet in diameter. So in other words, you had an enormous weapon. The idea of putting an A bomb of 15 kilotons yield inside of a suitcase would have been absolutely impossible.
Mm-hmm.
But now, with this technology,
the implications around the technology,
go on and on.
It's interesting to me. Now I'm thinking about Reagan. And one of the things that he says about SDI when he introduces it is, hey, we'll share the technology with you Soviets. Your scientists can come in and do it too. You participate in this shield, and we're both assured that nobody can get any nukes through.
Right.
This is exactly the thing that Kennedy, would have laid out, if he had gone forward with Ripple, he'd share it with the Soviets as well. And so it eliminates the needs on both sides.
Right.
So this is Eisenhower warning against the military-industrial complex. He's seeing it right there. And then Kennedy gets in, and he's the extenuation of that warning. And he's finding a way out.
And Reagan is seeing the same thing. And Reagan and Gorbachev take it a step further and actually start discussing zero option.
Right.
And that to me tells me that the technology was further along than the Star Wars detractors wanted to say. And we know it was further along. Why? Because Reagan gave his initial Star Wars speech after Dr. Edward Teller phoned him and told him that there had been a successful test of an X-ray laser. They set off an A-bomb underground and created an X-ray laser burst out of it, and the test was successful. So now we know how to make X-ray lasers. Isn't that wonderful?
Right.
We can fry those missiles in flight. So
give me, now we have the overarch. I just want to bring the UFO file in here for a moment. In Kennedy's back and forth with Khrushchev, we see the UFO file come into place. Kennedy even asked for the files to share with them. Reagan's conversation with Gorbachev. Easily, I can imagine Trump's with Putin as well.
Yeah.
Which is why everyone freaked out. But it's interesting because we've talked before about how the State Department, the national security state apparatus, has tried to keep these Russian and American leader counterparts from meeting the president. So Khrushchev and Kennedy, Reagan and Gorbachev, Trump and Putin in particular. Do you think that is also related to Ripple? I've often assumed it's related to the UFO file directly, and I'm sure those discussions on the record now have taken place. We've seen it. But do you think Ripple is part of that discussion?
Yes. First of all, because it is, as that last quotation that I read indicates, it is a technology that they're considering for use against near-Earth objects. And those don't need to be asteroids.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Something
Very
else.
interesting way that he put that.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's in the twilight.
It's in that little place, fuzzy little place. There's another reason I think it is part of the off the record conversation, particularly when you have someone like Putin who does speak English. He does not need a translator.
You've made this point. This is a brilliant point, because that even gets the translator out of the middle.
And we know that they met without their translators.
Right.
So that was simply Vlad saying, "You guys get out of here. We need to talk."
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And Trump, yeah, English. Okay, cool.
Right.
But anyway, and Nostrovia probably a few times during that discussion. But anyway, the other part of this story is, as anyone who's read my books knows, there is a fissionless thermonuclear item that is associated with the Soviet Union. In other words, there's a myth out there of a substance called red mercury.
Right.
Remember that?
Yes.
This was supposedly a substance that had been discovered in the Soviet Union that could initiate, a thermonuclear explosion without the use of a primary, without the use of an atom bomb. That's what it was. And there were all these stories, and occasionally they bubble up again. There was one about a year ago, someone trying to buy so-called red mercury on the black market. So there's this idea that the Soviets were in quest of a fissionless primary for their thermonuclear weapons. Tsar bomb without a bomb.
Wow.
And it's always been there. Now, the interesting thing to remember in that respect, that again will tie directly to Ripple, is that Sam Cohen, the American physicist responsible for the invention of the neutron bomb,
Right.
is on record as having said that he believes the Red Mercury story. He's the only serious scientist to ever
Wow.
come out. And I'm thinking, why would he believe it? Because he knows that there's a way, or he suspects strongly that there is a way of initiating a radiation shockwave without the need for an A bomb.
Huh.
And again, what does a fusion explosion release? Lots and lots of free neutrons.
Incredible.
Neutron bomb. So how does the inventor of the neutron bomb put two and two together? Because he's thinking along the similar lines. So yeah, I think there is every possibility that this technology is probably more widely known than it is. Here's the bad news. The relevance of all of this, I think, is obvious to anybody paying attention now. Why is there all this hysteria about people wanting to fight a nuclear war with Russia?
Good question.
And you'll notice the Russians are not saying you're going to die in a radioactive wasteland. They're not talking about that as much as they're talking about your cities are going to be,
Yeah.
blasted off the map.
Yeah. Yeah. True. You're saying both sides know at this point.
Both
And that's
sides
why
know.
that's why they're talking about it as if it's a viable thing, because
Right.
they already know that they can do this exchange
Right.
without the fallout
that used to be associated
Mhm.
with it. Bingo. Yeah.
See, now this is extraordinary. I want to bring in this thing about Berkner and the moon for a moment. See if
Okay.
we can wrap this all around
Okay.
and conclude on this. Berkner has a very close relationship with Kennedy around the space program.
Yes.
And he coaches him in the speech about we're going to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard.
Mhm.
And he actually asks him to include Mars in the speech, and Kennedy does not.
Mhm. Mhm.
But he says, when in this discussion at a certain point, Kennedy is like, I'm putting every egg in the basket of getting a man to the moon. And he said, I think it can be done by 1972. And Berkner says, you have to tell them to do it within this decade.
Mhm.
And he said, I don't know, I've looked at it. It looks like 1972 is as soon as they can do it. Berkner puts his arm on his shoulder and says, I was there when Antarctica happened. It was legend. This is legend. So that's how close he is
Mhm.
in this.
Mhm.
And yet we also know that he has the background on the UFO file. J. Allen Hynek has some interesting observations about him during that process of the Robertson panel. And we also know Antarctica, and then back to Antarctica with the International Geophysical Year with Soviets.
Mhm.
So when we put that together about Berkner and then him stressing this with Kennedy, now we have new discoveries, at least they're letting them out, about tunnels on the moon. So my question is, Joseph, did they observe those tunnels on the moon? And is that related to this question about, there's a whole superstructure there on the moon?
Oh, answer? Yes.
Yeah.
Want to know why?
Yes.
Most people don't know that the moon mission planning began almost as soon as NASA was formed.
Oh, interesting. Yes.
And as part of the planning at that time, the National Aeronautics Committee, NACA, which then was rolled by Eisenhower into NASA, it did a top secret optical telescopic mapping of the moon, of the surface that we can see, using optical telescopes here on Earth. And it was top secret.
Oh, wow.
They used the strongest telescopes at the strongest resolution they could. And they mapped the entire surface of the moon that we can see. And that whole study was classified top secret. Some of it still is.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
Interesting.
Yeah. And if you look at just the pictures, David Hastert Childers, one of my publishers, Adventures Unlimited,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
has a fascinating book that he published years and years ago called Extraterrestrial Archaeology. And all it is it's full of pictures
Hmm.
from these space missions, largely American. There's a couple from the Soviets. But you look at these pictures, Daniel, particularly of the moon, under ordinary camera optics that Surveyor and Apollo and all these different and Luna and so on took of the moon. You can sit and look at these things, and it will not be very. I guarantee you, within 5 minutes, you're going to start looking at things that just should not be in the picture because they're not natural.
Right. Right.
Just not. They're just not.
Yes.
And if that's the case, then that survey, that 50s survey that they did with the optical telescopes, told them long before they went there that there's stuff up there.
Hmm.
And we're going to have to look at it and find it. And in fact, I strongly suspect, let's tie this in with Richard Hoagland's basic thesis that there is structure on the surface of the moon that sticks above the surface, in some cases, a kilometer or two. There's like television towers minus the little light telling you don't fly here. That there's stuff up there that you cannot see. And if you combine that with this optical telescopic study, I strongly suspect that there was enough there to suggest to them that this may be structure, and we're going to have to pick our landing, which is what the survey was to pick the landing sites.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
And that's exactly what it was for. So, they're going to pick sites that are safe, number one, and number two, that are reasonably close enough that we can either get a good picture of something or we can go over and walk and pick it up. One of the two.
Right.
So, I think they knew a long time before they went. Kennedy, the problem with Kennedy was he wanted to share it.
Right.
He wanted to share it with the Soviets.
Right. He wanted that whole culture to move forward worldwide.
Yeah, worldwide. And if you look at here's something most Americans do not know. The Soviet lunar landing program had a booster rocket that was just as enormous and gigantic as the Saturn V that got Apollo to the moon. I've seen pictures of this monster, and they had actually built a couple of these things and were testifying them at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. And one of these test flights blew up on the pad.
Oh, wow.
And a rocket that big blowing up on the pad. And it did. It created an enormous amount of damage at the Cosmodrome, and of course, it'd be like blowing up a Saturn V at Cape Canaveral. You're going to wipe out the complex, and they're going to have to be rebuilt. Well, this is what happened to the Soviet program. The Soviets
sabotaged.
Oh, that's exactly what the Soviets thought it was. They thought it was the CIA had sabotaged their booster rocket.
Yeah,
and its test flight. So
that was just before our mission, was it not?
That was just, I believe it was within a matter. I think it was like they were testing this thing about 7-8 months before.
Yep.
Apollo 8, that did the flyby and everything. So yeah, it was a neck and neck race. And the Soviet, I firmly believe that, that it was sabotage that did it. And since we're talking about sabotage and clowns in America, who are the clowns in America's boots on the ground inside the Soviet Union?
Right.
Can you say General Reinhard Gehlen?
Gehlen, yes.
Bundesnachrichtendienst?
Yes.
The Gehlen Org, the Stay Behind Gladio organization, all of it. You're watching on television right now in the Ukraine, folks, with the Azov battalion and people like that. these groups inside the Ukraine. What do you think the historical antecedent of that is?
Yeah,
Galen.
absolutely. And it's interesting about Galen. I can't get out of that little loop without mentioning this. This is fascinating. Arthur Trudeau
Uh-huh.
was the general who was the mentor for our friend there, Corso. So he was the mentor for Philip J. Corso. And Corso would say all these things about, well, he knew about the UFO file and he put me in these different things, the Foreign Technology Office and all the rest. I found a very interesting memo of Alan Dulles trying to get Trudeau fired.
Oh, really?
And Trudeau has a big response to the memo. And in that, he says, let's not forget the CIA overlap of General Galen in the middle of all this. And he sets himself up directly against Dulles in that little exchange. I don't know exactly how they resolved it, but looking at the UFO file piece in relation to this clash of Trudeau and Dulles, and then Galen being brought up, so it's very common knowledge to the people on the inside. Yeah, this is Galen's organization.
Yep. Yeah. And what are you doing, Alan?
Right.
hobnobbing with Hitler's military intelligence chief. I mean,
I've got to send you that because this is weird. I've never seen it.
Oh,
before.
yeah, I would like to see it.
Yeah.
I've never seen it before.
Galen's name popped up. I wasn't even looking for Galen. So this is the weirdness.
There he is. Surprise.
So let's do this. Let's try to summarize.
Okay.
This is going to be an extraordinary journey of discovering the how far Ripple has shaped our actual technological future that's going on, and the past, and how much of a facade has this nuclear standoff been as well. So, I know it's an ongoing thing for us to look at it, and we're at an early stage of really opening this up. But I think with your research, something extraordinary is going on here. The question is, Joseph, this still has major implications for today.
Yes, huge.
And so if you could just mention a couple of those implications, if we've been, like you just said, if the Russians are saying, hey, we have these weapons, they can strike your cities, and NATO is acting like, so what? Let's have World War III with nukes. Obviously, both sides are utilizing this Ripple technology, and we don't know anything about it in the surface regular world.
I would wager that the Russians probably have it more operationally deployed than we do. I mean, we're afraid we're afraid even to talk about cold fusion, for crying out loud.
Exactly.
I put the Japanese way ahead of us on that one. But
right.
Anyway, as far as where the implications of all this, I'd be happy to discuss those. And let me mention two of them.
Yes.
That need to be mentioned. Because I'm now thinking that there is another figure to pay attention to that I've mentioned in my books in connection with this whole Ripple technology. Ripple's kind of the missing link here, is what I'm suggesting.
Yes.
Between Nazi Bell and all this stuff. But there's another missing link that it's a link to, and that's Philo Farnsworth. And for those of you who don't know who Philo Farnsworth was, he's basically the American inventor of television. But he also did something else when he was working for International Telephone and Telegraph in 1965. And again, this is in my book, The Nazi International. In 1965, Philo Farnsworth, Dr. Farnsworth, gave a press conference. And folks, this has been completely buried.
Wow. Memory hold, 100%.
Memory hold, censored, fact check. Can't talk about this, Philo. But anyway, Philo Farnsworth gave a press conference in which he told, in 1965, in which he told the world that he had sustained a fusion reaction for a little over half a minute. Now, this is before all these recent modern day things that we get in the news every now and then, that such and such a Chinese thing or German thing has sustained a fusion reaction for a couple of minutes, and fusion energies right around the corner just send us more billions,
Right. Yeah.
Well, the problem with Farnsworth was that he did this in a device that was about as big as a softball.
Oh.
And he didn't
Yeah.
do it with gigantic tokamak wiggler magnets and hot sun surface hot plasma and all of this stuff. He did it by creating essentially what was a very sophisticated vacuum tube. That was his specialty. And the way he compressed the fusion plasma itself was through virtual anodes.
Hmm.
Shock waves,
Oh, yes.
to put it in different terms.
Wow.
And he did this, at room temperatures with plug it into the wall socket voltage, and he called this thing a plasmator. Okay. And this little device, I put the patents in the book in Nazi International, so you can see this thing. It actually exists. There's actually a patent for it, which ITT, of course, owned at the time because he was working for them. And after he gave his press conference, we don't hear anything more about Philo Farnsworth or his plasmator or his fusers or any of his other little fusion experiments.
So weird.
No, I'm not done. For decades. And
Yeah.
then around 2008, I remember this because I picked up the phone. I called up Georgianne Hughes. I said, Georgianne, you're not going to believe this. And I told her, go look at such and such a site. And she said, oh, my word. That's like that guy. And I said, yeah, Farnsworth. So in 2008 or thereabouts, Lockheed Martin, to give it Catherine Fitz's name for it, did a commercial where they're highlighting all the wonderful things to come from Lockheed Martin laboratories. And they show this about a 3-foot diameter, bright silver chrome sphere with little knobs sticking out of it that look and it's a reactor, a fusion reactor that they can load on the back of the truck, they say.
Wow.
And Daniel, it's Philo Farnsworth's patent.
Wow.
It's just a bigger version. That's all it is. As far as I'm concerned, look at that thing. So in other words, somewhere between 1965 and 2008,
Incredible.
somehow IT&T got that patent into Lockheed Martin's grasp. And now the new age is just about to dawn. We can make fusion in the back of a truck. Here's the problem.
Fantastic.
Here's the problem.
After keeping it black for 40, 50
After
years.
keeping it black, yeah, for 40 years. Here's the problem. All of this technology is wonderful. It's all wonderful. And this exotic stuff has been around. I mean, just think of Nikola Tesla and wireless power. It's been around for a long time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But it's presented Mr. Globaloney with a bit of a problem. And the problem is it's relatively easy to make and engineer. And it's very, very, very powerful technology.
Mm-hmm.
So Mr. Globaloney has a proliferation problem and has had a proliferation problem since Nikola Tesla.
Oh, absolutely.
Now we've got this ripple technology, cold fusion, Philo Farnsworth, Nazi Bell, all this stuff involving plasma and all the neat, cool things you can do with it. And I'm not trying to rain on everybody's parade, but I'm going to rain on everybody's parade. I'm pardon the expression, I'm going to piss on it because they're building this big hot fusion magnetic containment facility in France, the big fusion ITAR reactor. Okay.
Right.
The question I want everybody to ask themselves is, let's say they get that technology to work.
Right.
The big magnetic hot plasma fusion reactors. Let's say they get it to work. Do you want that kind of reactor next to your kid's school park?
Oh, definitely not.
Why?
Because you're going to suffer from the after effects of that thing being around.
You know what the problem is? What happens if the containment breaks down suddenly? What happens? You've got a really big, really fast meltdown.
Oh, right.
It's like a hydrogen bomb just fizzled in your backyard.
Wow.
In other words, you've got not quite a full up hydrogen bomb explosion, but you've got an awful big bang.
Incredible.
And
You've got
all
the
it takes-
Two Eye Stone, Edgar Casey Atlantean meltdown.
Bingo!
It's happened before.
It's happened before.
Wow.
Ding, ding, ding.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
If that containment were to suddenly break down, let's say in a matter of a second or so, and that hot plasma keeps doing its thing, you've got a big meltdown that's going to happen real fast and real explosively.
Wow. Well, this is phenomenal because when we're talking about all this, really, if we bring it all around, now we're at the heart and the center of why the Berkner Kennedy speech was so
Huge.
kind of historic and was going to change everything. One. And two, we're out of the loop because it's 60 years later and this technology has been worked with and developed over that period. We're talking 60 years.
In all of the very nastiest ways.
Wow. Incredible. And then we're at this question now, which is why is Ripple so little known? And this, I think, is going to open up a gigantic discussion and maybe the key to the whole Black Project's exotic technology enigma. We could be looking at a good crucial piece that's been left out of the public conversation.
Yeah, the only public, like I said, the only publicly available sources are this paper and that one book by that scientist.
We can wrap it up. Although I can tell you, we're going to be talking about this extensively. Like, you know, as we develop more on it, I want us to build this in because it's remarkable. Joseph, absolutely incredible. And I look forward
to Daniel.
Yes, I look forward to having more around this, and I think Ripple is going to be absolutely crucial in going forward in terms of new research and all the things we're discovering about it. So, just incredible work on this.
Yeah. Final comment about Ripple. This one is kind of a off-the-record shout out to Dr. John Brandenburg, but who, if you don't know, is a scientist that actually does work in these types of projects for the government.
Tracking the Mars nuclear.
He's been tracking the Mars. Yeah, when he says that you can have thermonuclear bombs of 1,000 megatons, which, you know, why would you want to? But when he says things like that in the wake of this Ripple business, I tend to take what he says very, very seriously.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He was at our conference.
Yeah, he was at our conference. Absolutely.
Incredibly enough. Joseph, absolutely incredible. Of course, everything is available at gizadeathstar.com. I will say this, that we're going to be doing a lot more, probably in a clandestine fashion, but we'll get as much of that out to the public as we can about this, because I think it's absolutely explosive, to coin a term.
Yes, it is. Thanks for having me on, Daniel.
All right, we'll talk soon.
Yeah, bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed the startling breakthroughs in this episode with Dr. Farrell. We'll be covering more on Ripple and JFK's undelivered speech with Lloyd Berkner and how it all relates to the UFO file. You can find more on Berkner in my Apotheum UFO File documentary series. Join us on Friday nights at 8 p.m. for new episodes of the X series. See you soon.